So good morning. Now we will be continuing from the topic where we last finished. So signs and symptoms of urolithiasis. What are the symptoms? So as you know, the most common symptom is pain. The most common symptom of a urinary stone disease is pain, especially if it is obstructing stone. So pain can be colicky or it can be non-colicky. It can be a dull aching pain, especially in a large or small renal stones, dull aching pain, when it is felt at the renal angle or costovertebral angle. And it can be colicky pain when it is obstructing. It can be a large pelvic stone, ureteric stone will lead to colicky pain, and which can radiate to the various parts depending on the site of stone, whether it is in upper ureter, mid ureter or lower ureter. So it can cause from loin to groin is the typical radiation of the pain. The second most common symptom is hematuria. Hematuria can be gross or visible hematuria, or it can be microscopic or non-visible hematuria, which you can see non-visible hematuria in urine, routine and microscopy examination. The third symptom can be fever with chills, especially with infected stones like struveite, bruchite, matrix stones, xanthogranulomatous pyelonephritis and pyonephrosis. So XGPN is xanthogranulomatous pyonephritis and pyonephrosis, accumulation of infected pus in the pelvic ileal system because of long standing obstruction. The fourth common symptom is nausea and vomiting. So there can be nausea and vomiting. Gastrorenal reflex is a very common thing. Gastrorenal reflex, which can lead to nausea and vomiting. And the last, a very dreadful symptom is anuria, calculus anuria. It can be absolute anuria or total anuria. So when anuria will happen? When there is a bilateral obstructing stone, bilateral large obstructing stone in that case, or when there is a solitary functioning kidney, there is only one kidney which is functional, or the patient himself is having only one kidney, whether congenitally or iatrogenically because of removal of the other kidney, he may have only one kidney. So in that case, when there is a obstructing stone, there can be an anuria, which is very dreadful condition, and which if you don't address timely, it can eventually lead to death, chronic kidney disease and long-term dialysis dependence. So signs in the stone disease, generally signs are most common is no physical finding. Generally you will not have any specific physical findings, though you may have a costovertebral angle or flank tenderness. There can be a large flank mass in case of pyonephrosis, xanthogranulomatous pyelonephritis, fever. There can be bladder palpable when there is a stone has obstructed the prostatic urethra, bladder neck or urethra. Then bladder will be full and you can palpate the bladder. And the other sign is scoliosis, spasm because of spasm of paraspinal muscles. So when there is a spasm of paraspinal muscle, so you will have a typical finding in the X-ray KUB where you will see the scoliosis. So the spine convexity and concavity, you can make out that which side is pathology. So as paraspinal muscle of that side contracts, so the convexity will be towards the normal side and concavity towards the pathological side. So these are the signs which you should be aware. A few special situations like in transplanted kidney, if he develops a stone, then the classical colic will be absent because of when you take a kidney, harvest a kidney from a donor, there will be no when you harvest the kidney and ureter along with to transplant in a recipient, the neurological bundles will be absent. So the classical colic pain may be absent in transplanted kidney. In pregnancy, you may not be very sure the colic is because of the urological cause or because of obstetric or non-obstetric causes of pain. So you should be very careful, especially in cases of pregnancy. In cases of skeletal dysmorphia, you may not, he or she may have congenital scoliosis, so you may not be able to make out whether this scoliosis is current pathological or it is old pathological. Obesity examination will be difficult. Pediatric patients examination and clinical findings are difficult, and certain malformations. So what are the risk factors for stone disease? So affluent class, dietary habits, bedridden patients, climate like hot climate, especially like Rajasthan, Gujarat, those belt are more stone formers. Dietary habits, employment like police, traffic personnel who stand full day in a like sun, farmers, laborers, they have more because they are more prone for dehydration. Then family history of stone, some medicines as we discussed in the last class, the medicines which can lead to formation of stones, and hindrances, anatomical hindrances like there is a BPH, stricture urethra, ureteric stricture, PUJ obstruction, or any anatomical abnormal anatomical obstruction of the pelvic ileal system can lead to stasis of urine and subsequently infection and formation of stones. So what all investigations you do when you suspect a case of urolithiasis? So the first investigation after your history examination, where you do clinical examination, abdomen. So clinical examination should always, as we discussed in the first class, abdominal examination, genitalia examination, and rectal examination. Then especially you should see is there any pedal edema because of obstruction, long-standing obstruction, anuria, oliguria. So creat might have raised and patient may have features of CKD or acute kidney injury. So first investigation imaging is X-ray KUB, plain X-ray KUB, which can give you lot of information. As you can see in these X-ray images, there are multiple stones in this kidney is studded with stones and then bilateral stones. So first imaging is plain X-ray KUB. As you can see, this is a large Staghorn calculus. So this also is a KUB. So most important thing, which picture I didn't get, is what is X-ray KUB. Okay, it is not synonymous with X-ray abdomen. This you should be, so it should be very clear in your mind. X-ray KUB is not synonymous with X-ray abdomen. Okay, the exposure is totally different. So in this image, actually it is not a complete X-ray KUB. It has been cropped by me. So so what exactly X-ray KUB is? The most important thing is the swash shadows. This you can see a thin line in any previous one. It is there. Okay. So there will be most important thing when you qualify the X-ray KUB is this is the typical, you can see the swash shadows. Swash muscle shadows should be visible. As you can see faintly here because underlying bowel gas, it is not very clear here, but you can see this line which is going like this. This is swash shadows. So swash shadows is very basic prerequisite to qualify the X-ray as X-ray KUB. So first is swash shadows. The second is exposure, where you are exposing the limit. So it should be from T10 vertebra, T10 to it should finish by the lesser tuberosity of femur or lower end of pubic symphysis. Okay, so it should cover that much area to qualify it as X-ray KUB. And then why T10 we see, because you can see the axis of the kidney. Here kidney is very well visualized in the plain X-ray in spite of being plain X-ray. So as you can see, kidneys are 30 degree medially and posteriorly is axis. So This is the axis. So it cuts both kidney axis, normally cuts at T10 level. So you should exposure of X-ray QV is from T10 to lower border of pubic symphysis or lesser tuberosity. Okay, this should be exposure, so that your complete kidney axis you can comment any renal stone, any ureteric stone, any bladder stone, any prostatic urethral stone you can comment on. Number one. Number two, whenever you report or when you describe X-ray, you should start with this is a plain X-ray KUB, because both short shadows are visible and its exposure is from T10 to lower border of ischial pubic symphysis or lesser tuberosity. And then you should remember first comment on the normal skeletal shadows. So as you can see, vertebra, ribs, hip bone. So normal skeletal, then abnormal skeletal, if any abnormal skeletal shadow. Then third is normal soft tissue shadows, and then abnormal soft tissue shadows. So here you can see normal soft tissue shadow is both kidneys, you can see this is normally present. So normal soft tissue shadows are, you should describe, like why kidney is seen in X-ray QB. There is another question which should come into your mind. Why kidneys are seen? Kidneys are seen because of rich vascularity and perinephric fat. That's why kidneys are visible in X-ray QB, because of rich vascularity and perinephric fat. So then like that you should comment on the normal soft tissue shadows and abnormal soft tissue shadows, if any. The third thing you should comment on the any radio opaque shadows seen along the line of pelvic calyceal system, kidney, ureter and bladder. Along the line, any radio opaque shadow seen or not. And then you should comment the first thing. Then you should also comment on the preparation of the patient for the X-ray, that this is not well prepared X-ray because the bowel has not been cleaned. So ideally one night before, bowel should be cleaned with laxatives so that the area of interest is better visualized. So then the other thing you should know is the course of pelvis and ureter into the bladder. This also should be, that I will show you here in eye view. So first in imaging, what you did is X-ray QB. Once you have done X-ray QB, and the second imaging what you ask in urolithiasis is ultrasonography. Then depending on the type of stone, site of stone, number of stone, biochemical features of the patient, the third investigation is intravenous urogram, or commonly previously was known as intravenous pyelogram, but now the new better term is intravenous urogram. It is not pyelogram only, because you are not seeing only pelvis, you are seeing all the ureter also. So now we call it as intravenous urogram. So as you can see, it's this in the left side, there is normal pelvic calyceal system. Then you can see the pelvic-ureteric junction and the course of the ureter. So it traverses along the tip of the transverse process of vertebra, as you can see, and it goes down. And the right side, because of there is a stone here and there is obstruction to the flow of urine, the urine has accumulated and the pelvic calyceal system is dilated. So as you can see, there is a normal cupping you can see here, which has been blunted here because of obstruction and accumulation of urine. The other thing which is of utmost importance is in cases of pediatric urolithiasis. So pediatric urolithiasis generally most commonly because of metabolic and genetic causes, as we discussed before. So generally stones are multiple, bilateral, as you can see here, multiple and bilateral. So in pediatric cases you should evaluate metabolic and genetic causes always. You should always evaluate. So the most other investigation is ultrasonography. Ultrasonography will give you a clear picture of the kidney, as you can see here, kidney and the pelvic calyceal system. So in ultrasonography, kidney you can see very well is outer cortex, inner medulla. Okay, outer cortex, it is like a, you can imagine as a egg, outer white and inner yellowish portion. So outer cortex, inner medulla. So in this, if any abnormal stones are there, or cyst or tumor or hydronephrosis, can be very well seen in ultrasonography. So you call as when you specifically ask, in a case of urology, you ask for USG KUB, kidney ultrasound of kidney, ureter, bladder and prostate, KUBP. Ultrasound USG of KUBP, kidney, ureter, bladder and prostate. The next investigation what we perform is bulb ureterogram, BU, or bulb ureterogram, where through cystoscopy we put a catheter into the ureteric orifices, into the ureter, and then we inject contrast to see if any abnormal pathology is there. So as you can see, contrast is traveling into ureter, and then there is a area where contrast is non-opacified, and then again you can see opacified pelvic ileal system. Okay, so filling defect will be any foreign body, which is most likely a stone. The next investigation, which is not done very commonly for stone specifically, except in few certain conditions where your ionizing radiation is of concern, like in pregnancy, is MRI. MRI is not a usual investigation asked for a stone disease until specified where your ionizing radiation is a concern, like in pregnancy. So next is metabolic evaluation. So as I told you, in children especially, metabolic evaluation is very important. So, and all recurrent repeated bite stone formers, any patients who are developing bilateral stones, and pediatric population should undergo metabolic evaluation. Bilateral stones, recurrent stone formers and pediatric population should undergo metabolic evaluation. So metabolic evaluation is consist of basically of stone analysis report and the type of crystals in the urine. So stone analysis, so when you take out the stone by any means of management, which we will discuss later, you send it for analysis, stone analysis. So stone analysis can be of different types. It can be a simple chemical analysis, which will tell you the constituent ions present in the stones, or it can be by polarizing microscopy, which helps in identifying the crystals in the stones. Then the third is X-ray refraction, which is done more commonly nowadays, which will tell you the geometry and architecture of the stone. And then infrared spectroscopy, which is a semi-qualitative assessment, and Raman spectroscopy. So these are the methods of stone analysis. So what kinds of crystal in sediments you can see? Cystine crystals are hexagonal in shape. Cystine crystals are hexagonal in shape. Struvite are coffin lid shaped crystals. Struvite stones will have coffin lid shaped crystals. Bruchite stone will have splinter or spoke-like aggregates. Spoke-like aggregates. Calcium will be amorphous powder. Uric acid will be rhomboid. Uric acid will be rhomboid shape. Wedelite will be bipyramidal or envelope, and wavellite will be dumbbell shape. And the other very important assay to be done in cases are, especially if there is high calcium, serum calcium in the biochemical analysis of patient, is parathormone assay, so which will be elevated in primary hyperparathyroidism, as we have discussed in the last class. You can read it, cellulose phosphate test and hydrochlorothiazide challenge test. Urine pH is very important. When you do what all investigation, urine pH, fasting urine pH more than 6, fasting urine pH, as because we have discussed, there is generally an alkaline tide after meals. So after meals the pH might be high, so you have to think of fasting urinary pH, which is, if it is more than 6, suspect renal tubular acidosis. Then you can do acid load test, and acid load test you give ammonium chloride the bedtime, and then overnight fasting, and see the urine pH. So normally ammonium chloride will raise the acidity of stone, but normal person without renal tubular acidosis will be able to eliminate it, will result in urine pH below 5.3. So if it is more than that, then you should think of renal tubular acidosis. Then the other most important metabolic evaluation is 24-hour urine for calcium. So you do salt and calcium restricted diet, no salts for 1 week. Then see the urine calcium. If it is less than 250 milligram per day, then it confirms the diet dependent hypercalciuria type 2. Then other what all 24-hour collection for metabolic evaluation you do for uric acid, oxalate, citrate and cystinuria. So these are the various values which you need not remember exactly, but you should know what are things to be collected and checked in 24-hour urine collection in a metabolic evaluation of stone. So 24-hour urine you should check for uric acid, oxalate, citrates, cystine, calcium. Then urinary pH. So these are the important things which you should remember. Now about the management. So first thing what you have to manage is how patient has presented for what? For pain. So attend the pain first. Normally non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs are the first choice of analgesics which you prescribe. Most of the pain subsides by usage of non-NSAIDs. So diclofenac sodium is the most effective, generally most effective way of managing ureteric colic or colicky pain, much better than your antispasmodic, which is surprisingly prescribed more in a cases of stone like your Buscopan or Dotaverine. So these are not very effective. Most important is NSAIDs. So diclofenac sodium is the first choice, provided patient doesn't have any past history of raised creatinine, in which cases the NSAIDs are contraindicated. So if pain doesn't subside by oral NSAIDs, you escalate to, as you know, the step ladder pattern of pain management, which I think you have already gone through step ladder pattern of pain management. So you step by from the most commonly used drug to the rare used drug. So NSAID is oral, injectable. Then you prescribe opioids like tramadol. Then you escalate to morphine, which is the last drug which can be used to alleviate the pain of the patient. Then after attending the pain, first thing attend the pain, then you evaluate. Then basic evaluation is to blame it on the stone. So before blaming the cause of colic to stone, you should do the basic evaluations like X-ray KUB, ultrasound KUB, and then if required IVU or CT. These are the other important investigating tools. Then you do urine routine examination, blood counts like CB, complete blood counts, which must include what are the total counts, which is the most important thing you should see. Total counts, platelets, renal function test, creatinine, urea, electrolytes, sodium and potassium. These are the important things which you should consider. And then you should plan for your management therapy. So management therapy can be conservative or interventional. Conservative therapy is also known as medical expulsive therapy, MET, medical expulsive therapy, or CET, calculus expulsive therapy, medical expulsive therapy or calculus expulsive therapy. So now again this therapy depends on the site, size, symptoms and biochemical values of stone, whether you will give or not. So the most important myth what is there is like we can dissolve stone by giving some treatment or medical management. It is generally an illusion. So if there is a large renal stone, as we seen in the previous x-rays and this thing, large big stone, that will never go by medical therapy. So that requires interventional management. So most important thing what you must know is expulsive therapy is used in ureteric stones only, not in the renal stones. Expulsive therapy is used for ureteric stones. So the success of expulsive therapy depends on the site of stone, size of stones. Okay, so if the stone is in lower ureter, the chances of getting it expelled spontaneously with medicine are 70 to 80%. If it is in mid ureter, it is 50 to 50%. If it is an upper uterus, only 20 to 30%. Then size. If the stone size in the ureter is less than 7 mm, the chances of expulsion is high. If it is more than 7 mm, chances of expulsion is low. Then it depends on the comorbid conditions of the patient, which decreases the ureteric peristalsis like diabetes mellitus, hypothyroidism. This also affects the spontaneous expulsion of stones by conservative mechanism. So, what my aim is to tell you is not the deep theory and this your theory stuff, which you can very well to write in exam, which you can very well read in your basic books and write it off. So what I want to give you understanding of overall urology, and when you read your whatever book you are reading in the urology part, you should be able to understand it. So I don't want you to mug it up. Like, you may have to mug up few things, but my aim is not to make you understand and interesting than when you read theory, because anyhow theory part you will read from whatever book you have to write in your exams. But if you know the basic things, if you know overall what is IVU, IVP, when expulsive therapy is used, when it will work, how it will work, and then when you will read, it will be easy for you to understand. So expulsive therapy, ureteric stone only. This thing is so less understood even by most of our senior most medical fraternity across the globe, non-urological. Those qualified urologists, they only know when expulsive therapy is used, when it should not be used. Otherwise, if you see, whenever the best known physician, non-urological doctor, any stone, they have some 2-3 names: cystone, Neary, Alka stone. That much only knowledge they have. So my aim is, when you grow up, you should know the difference when you have to give expulsive therapy, when this alkalinizer should be used. So if a large renal stone, you are giving expulsive therapy is of no use, is foolish. So expulsive therapy should be used in a ureteric stone, that too preferably 7 mm or less in size, and depending on the site, upper, mid or lower ureter, you can explain patient what are the chances of getting it expelled. So expulsive therapy comprises of three basic things. The first, what we add is alpha blocker with or without a steroid. Alpha blocker with or without a steroid. Second is diuretic. Third is pain. So what generally we prescribe is alpha blocker, which is the most important constituent of expulsive therapy. Tamsulosin, which is most commonly used. However, you can use other alpha blockers as well, but since tamsulosin is little cheaper in cost, it is more commonly used. So tamsulosin, and the steroid what we use here is deflazacort, 30 milligram deflazacort. So you can give combination of tamsulosin 0.4 mg with deflazacort 30 mg. This is the one combination. Then you use along with diuretic, you can give thiazide or torsemide 5 mg minimum diuretic. Diuretic is not even compulsorily, it can be avoided also. And the third is pain management. You can give either diclofenac or combination of dotaverine and mefenamic acid. We give antispasmodic and NSAID combination. So this is the basic medical or calculus expulsive therapy, which can be used in 1, 2 or 3 cycles depending on the progression of the disease or regression of the disease. So you have to give patient for a week or 10 days this therapy. Then you ask him to come back and check again how is the pain, do imaging, where is the stone, check counts, are they rising. If the patient has fever, then you have to terminate it and do intervention. If everything is stable, you can still again continue therapy for one or 2 more weeks. The other options after this is endourological management of stone, extracorporeal shockwave lithotripsy ESWL, and open or laparoscopic removal of stone. So the most important thing what you should remember, when surgical intervention is absolutely required, these things also are very, very poorly understood in our non-urological fraternity. When symptoms are severe, intractable pain in spite of analgesic, or analgesic uses timing and dosage are very high, symptoms are severe, fever is there, then please don't try medical management. Obstruction is significant. Second is significant obstruction. There is a cross dilatation of system because of stone. Please don't use medical management. Third is sepsis. If counts are high, total counts, if there is a frank pulse, counts are high, patient having persistent fever, please don't use medical management or extracorporeal shock wave lithotripsy in these cases. In these cases, they require urgent intervention. And the fourth most important point, which has not been mentioned in the slide, is when there is a solitary kidney stone in a single kidney or there is a bilateral obstruction. Then also please don't do medical management. So endourology most commonly consists of URS and PCNL. URS is, you should know the ureterorhinoscopy. Ureterorhinoscopy, URS. Uretero, from long slender scope will be there of various sizes from 4.5 French to 8 French. You enter through urethra into the ureteric orifice into ureter and you fragment the stone. So uretero, then you can enter even the calyces in favorable anatomical group of patients. Ureterorhinoscopy. Then second is PCNL, percutaneous nephrolithotomy. Percutaneous nephrolithotomy. You enter kidney through a small hole on the back and then you pass a scope into it and then you fragment and remove the stones. So percutaneous nephrolithotomy, what are the basic steps? It can be done in prone position, which is most commonly done, or now in supine position also we do it, but most commonly is prone position. And then most important thing what you should remember is on the back of the patient near the around the 12th rib, you can see first you pass a ureteric catheter and you fill contrast into the system, and in the fluoro C arm you see the kidney and you puncture it with a needle. You puncture with a needle. Once you are enter in the system, you can see the clear reflux of urine will come from the needle. Then you pass a guide wire and then you do serial dilatation of the tract. There are sequential serial dilators which you dilate, and at the end you put a Amplard, this black color sheath, this is called as Amplard sheath. This will stay inside the system, and through this Amplard sheath you pass your nephroscope. As you can see, nephroscope is going, and then you fragment the stone, take out the stone, take out the Amplard sheath, and you can keep a nephrostomy tube for a couple of days and then you can subsequently remove it. So these are the, as you can see, the large stone. We have passed the needle into the pelvic calyceal system, then subsequently Amplards has been placed. This is the stone, and then we have fragmented the stone. We have removed the stone with grasper. Stone is completely cleared, and then we place a double J stent. You can see one coil is here, other coil will be in the bladder. Double J stent. So this was the stone which has been cleared by PCNL, and you can see the double J stent into the system. So this is the inside view of kidney through a nephroscope. After dusting and fragmenting stone, some dust will remain, and this you can see small plaques over the papilla. These are the Randall's plaque, as we discussed in the last class. So other stone, very interesting stone, is ureteromeatal stones. As you can see, this is the bladder, and this is the ureteric orifice. The stone is just popping out through it. So in these cases, you can just cut the ureteric meatus little bit and you can take out the stone. It causes a lot of edema, as you can see. This is the X-ray. You can see this is the lower limit of your. This should be the lower limit of your X-ray KUB. It's lower end of SI. So this is the ureteromeatal stone. So now something about the shockwave lithotripsy. Okay, extracorporeal shockwave lithotripsy. So there will be a shock wave generator, coupling mechanism. It comprises of three things: shock wave generator, there will be a generator, shock wave generator, which will generate the shock wave. Then there will be coupling mechanism between the machine and the patient to deliver the shock effectively to the patient. So there is a coupling mechanism. There will be a like a coupling mechanism can be air or can be generally a lubricant jelly, which facilitates the effective delivery of shock from the machine to the patient. Okay, so the shock wave machine will be there, and the shock wave deliverable, there will be a pack which will be fitted to the patient back and over a lubricant surface, and then you can localize the stone. You have to localize the stone by X-ray in the OT or ultrasound, and then you have to focus the shock wave generator to deliver the focused shock wave to the stone, and you have to focus in such a way that the maximum shock wave should go directed toward the stone with minimum dispersal of the shock waves to the adjacent organ. So what is the principle of shock wave lithotripsy? Is unharmonic acoustic waves bearing non-linear pressure characteristics, namely a steep rise in a pressure amplitude with a rapid decline, steep rise and the rapid decline causing compressive forces to disintegrate the stone. So what are the other most common mechanisms? Are tear and shear mechanism, spallation, cavitation, quasi-static, dynamic fatigue. This just remember the names: tear and shear mechanism, spallation, cavitation, quasi-static and dynamic fatigue. So erosion by cavitational forces at the entry and exit point of shock wave. Then shattering of the central portion of stone due to energy absorption. So what are the, so as you know, the shock wave lithotripsy is very commonly used. ESWL, everywhere you will see ESWL, which is mostly used by non-neurological colleagues, which they don't have much idea about it and they still use it. So what is the unfavorable lower pole? Infundibulopelvic angle, which is less than 70 degree, infundibular length more than 30 mm, infundibular width less than 4 mm. This I will tell you 1 second to make you understand it better. See here. So infundibulopelvic angle. So this is the calyx, this is the infundibulum. This is the calyx, this is infundibulum. Infundibulum joins the minor calyx, major calyx, infundibulum, pelvis. Okay. So this is the infundibulopelvic angle. So what happens if infundibulopelvic angle, as we told you, is less than 70 degree? Okay. So if it is less than 70 degree, it will be very acute. So the stone in lower pole, stone in lower calyx, when you do a shock wave, it cannot, even after disintegration, it cannot traverse up and come down to ureter to pass off. So infundibulopelvic angle less than 70 degrees unfavorable. Infundibular length more than 30 mm and width less than 4 mm. So infundibular length, if it is longer in lower pole, if it is longer, so it will be difficult for even after disintegrating the stone to come out from here and pass off. So length should not be more than 30 mm. And width, if it is very narrow infundibulum less than 4 mm, then also it is same thing. The stone will be after disintegration difficult to pass off. Then skin to stone distance, because if patient is more obese, then the shock wave will lose its efficacy from the skin to fat. They have to traverse skin, fat, kidney and then reach stone. So they will lose their efficacy if patient is very obese. So if it is the skin to stone distance is more than 10 centimeter, then also it is unfavorable for shock wave. So as you can see, this is the shock wave machine. So what are the precautions during shock wave lithotripsy? Avoid shock wave lithotripsy in pregnant women. It is contraindicated in pregnancy. Large aortic aneurysm, it can rupture aneurysm if the shock waves are dissipated into the aneurysm, it can rupture it. In case of infection, urosepsis, cardiac disease, bleeding disease, renal failure, gross skeletal abnormalities, you cannot position it properly. So in these cases, shock waves are contraindicated. When large stone burden is there, it's better to put a double J stent so that stone fragments can pass off easily. Most important thing is avoid casual over treatment. So any stone, if you go, those who have ESWL, all non-neurological colleagues, they will use shockwave, they will tell, will treat with shockwave everything, which is not the case. So these things should not happen. So apart from ureterorhinoscopy, PCNL, ESWL, these are three commonly used modalities. Then next, now less commonly used, it was open or laparoscopy, which was used to be the norm before. With advent of scopes, endoscopes, this has become less common. So but you should know, pyelolithotomy, extended pyelolithotomy. Pyelolithotomy is named after Foley's pyelolithotomy, extended pyelolithotomy, which is also known as Jill Vernett's pyelolithotomy. One second. Coagulum pyelolithotomy, radical nephrotomy, anatrophic nephrolithotomy, ureterolithotomy, partial nephrectomy, ileal ureter to facilitate passage of stone. So these are the pictorial description. Foley's pyelolithotomy, where you give a U-shape incision in the pelvis. You are giving U-shape so that you can, if you want, you can extend it here like this. U-shape incision and take out the stone. Jill Vernett's extended pyelolithotomy, where you give all calyces you are opening. Then radial nephrotomy, stones located deeply, you can give radial cut into kidney to remove the stone. Polar nephrectomy, large stone in the lower pole and the parenchyma, functioning parenchyma is completely gone, then you can do a polar nephrectomy. Then coagulum pyelolithotomy, where you use cryoprecipitates, you put a small hole in the pelvis and inject cryoprecipitate, and then stones will be trapped in that and you can take out. Then the last and most dreaded was anatrophic nephrotomy, where you open the kidney, you bivalve the kidney, take out the stone and suture it again. This causes a lot of bleeding and used to lead to non-functioning kidney. So where you open the kidney, you should know one plane which is most important is Broddel's line, which is considered as most avascular line, relatively avascular line of the kidney, which is anterior 2/3, junction of anterior 2/3 and posterior 1/3 of kidney laterally, posterolaterally is the Broddel's line. So this is a pictorial description of extended pyelolithotomy. So this is what I was talking about, double J stent. As you can see, double J stent. So this is the upper coil. That becomes a self-retaining mechanism. Upper coil, ureter, and then is the bladder coil. So it remains in the system without any string or thread. So this is the way to keep it stay in the system. This is double J stent. Double J stent helps in facilitating flow of urine through the sides of stone, and it prevents formation of fibrosis and stricture. So after any procedure, you keep stent for 4 to 6 weeks, and once healing has completed, then you can remove the stent. Then you have to remove the stent. Then other most important you should know is laser lithotripsy. This mechanism of stone fragmentation we will discuss in some other class. So last you should know something about the bladder stone, which are mostly secondary, most common in males. The most important symptom of bladder stone is sudden interruption of the urination, because most likely it is most common it is mobile stone. So when patient stands, from bladder stone falls into the bladder neck, it obstructs the urine flow, there is no urine flow. When patient lie down, the stone goes up again urine starts. So this is a typical feature of the, so intermittency of stream is a typical feature of bladder stone. So bladder stone can be removed by various energy sources like cystolithotripsy, cystolitholapexy and large stones can be removed by open method, cystolithotomy. These are see few large stones. So these stones which you can remove by endoscopy, these are large stones which you have to remove better by open method. So this finishes our class. Now from next classes we will concentrate on some other topic of urology. If you have any doubts, you can leave a message. Thank you.